Hello, welcome to our second screencast. This is part one, and as before, it's better if you work with a colleague and you work together in twos or maybe threes. I'm going to ask you some questions and give you some things to think about. It's good if you can chat, pause the screencast, chat with someone else, but if there isn't anybody else available, then fine. Read my questions, pause the screencast, think, and then make notes. That's really important, yeah? Okay, so a native speaker, that's someone like me, a native speaker of English. Generally somebody from America, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, sometimes South Africa too. And a non-native speaker is someone like you, who speaks English as a second or other language. So, please have a think. Compare a native speaker of English with a non-native speaker. What are the advantages of each teacher? And what are the disadvantages too? Pause the screencast now, please. Okay. Obviously, there's a big pay disparity. Native speakers of English generally get a lot more in wages. Parents demand a native speaker of English, don't they? But do they really know why? Schools fly native speakers over from the USA and the UK. But why? What are our advantages? Okay, here's another question for you. How much of your classroom talk is in Indonesian? And what do you talk in Indonesian for? Is it translation, general chat, discipline, giving instructions, clarification? Talk together or make some notes and have a guess. What percentage of your classroom talk is in Indonesian? Pause the screencast now, please. Okay. Look, it's not necessarily a bad thing to use Indonesian in class. It is an advantage that you have over many native speakers. There's been a lot of research recently about the advantage of non-native local teachers. And there are some great advantages. Now, a non-native speaker, an Indonesian English teacher, is a role model. They have successfully learned English and they're someone for the students to look up to. So here, a role model of successful language learning. Now look at the next 3 points here. More successful at teaching learning strategies. More information about the English language. That's interesting, isn't it? And better able to anticipate language difficulties. Well, think about it. Where did I learn my English? I learned my English as a baby from my mother. I learned my English through living in England. You learned your English academically in class. So you'll have a better idea of learning strategies. You'll be able to convey more information to people who are Indonesian about English. And of course, you will know more about language difficulties because you are Indonesian. Which brings us on to the next point here, empathy. Yeah, you have empathy with the learners because you've been there yourself. You know all the problems. And a crucial advantage, you're able to share the learner's language. You can clarify, you can translate, you can repeat or recast things in Bahasa. How do you feel about the above? Do you feel that the non-native speaker, that's you, really do have more advantages than the native speaker? Talk together and pause the screencast, please. Of the advantages of native speakers from the USA, the UK, often people say, well, we have more authentic pronunciation, we have an accent which is authentic, we know about English or American idioms. But why is that important to you? Different countries closer to you, like Singapore, China, India, they have their own versions of English. And English idiom, English accents and pronunciation, native speaker, is really not very helpful when you're trying to talk to somebody from Singapore. We do have a cultural reference, and often students are motivated by connecting with US, UK, Australian culture. That certainly is an advantage, but there's also many big advantages to being like you, a native speaker, a non-native speaker of English. So I've put a little podcast on the website. Please take a look at that, by Sylvana Richardson. Very interesting, her view of the native and the non-native speaker. So, tell me, what do you teach? Talk together. Pause the screencast. Okay, do you teach science? Do you teach mathematics? Do you teach geography? Is that all you teach? For instance, does the geography teacher teach any physics? The forces that push mountains up? Do geography teachers teach culture? Well, of course they do. The culture of all the different countries that you learn in geography. Biology? Do geography teachers talk about the rainforest? The glaciers? Yeah, sure they do. Is this biology? Of course it is. Civics? These different societies you're learning about around the world. So there is an overlap with many different subjects. So is a geography teacher a geography teacher? Or just a general studies teacher? And what about teaching not what to think, but how to think? Do you teach thinking skills, analysis, deduction, classification, comparison? There's many of them. Now, what about these behavioural ideas? Whose job is it to teach that? Is it the parents or is it the teacher? Morality, how to behave, social skills. The teacher's job, especially with young children. So what do we teach? If the geography teacher isn't a geography teacher, then what sort of teacher is the geography teacher? Perhaps all of you are English teachers. This is the theory of CLIL, or Content and Language Integrated Learning. You see, we're not learning geography, physics, divinity, mathematics. We're learning English through these topics. Okay, so the subject, or parts of the subject, are taught through using English. And there's a dual focus, the learning of the content, geography, physics, maths, but also the learning of a foreign language. This is essentially what CLIL is. And in my view, you are all CLIL teachers. So what's more important? Teaching your subject, teaching thinking skills, teaching social skills, or teaching English? Talk together and pause the screencast, please. Okay, so let's look at CLIL in a bit more depth. Look at quote number A from Ball in 2015. You can't teach a language without content. You can't teach a language without context. It has to be linked to some sort of context for people to understand it. And the content can't focus without language. You can't teach geography without using language. So, Ball says CLIL can easily mean anything. But I think it means more than that. CLIL is learning, look at quote B from Marsh, Marsland and Stenberg. It's more about learning through learning language and giving students that intrinsic motivation that comes from inside, that curiosity that's within every young person to study a subject. And finally, look at the third quote, which I found online. It provides exposure to the language so that extra English lessons, they're not so necessary in the curriculum because you're learning English all the time, yeah? Which subjects can you not use CLIL? Maybe Bahasa, maybe Sunda, maybe learning Mandarin. No, you can't do that using the CLIL methodology. But otherwise, any subject you can. So, CLIL, it's not a language lesson, and it's not really a subject lesson, is it? So what we think of it in terms of the 4 C's curriculum, this is Coyle's idea, and it contains these 4 elements. Now, number 1, this is what we traditionally think of teaching, yeah? Building up your knowledge, building up your understanding of a particular subject, geography, art, music, whatever, yeah? Then communication, building up general communication skills in English whilst learning the language. Social skills, interacting, opinions, disagreeing, yeah? Thirdly is cognition. This is thinking skills from Bloom's taxonomy. And fourthly, culture. That's interesting. Exposing students to different perspectives, different understandings of the world, giving them a deep awareness, comparing your own culture with others. But whose culture are you teaching? Interesting question. So, how do you teach these 4 C's? I want you now to discuss your strategies together. Please pause the screencast. Right, the next page, I'd love you to print this out and keep it as a poster. Developing thinking skills. Look at all these thinking skills. Every lesson you teach, you should include a plan of how you will introduce and develop several of these skills each class. Pause it and have a look. And discuss what strategies you use to teach, to promote, to develop these thinking skills. Okay. Conceptual content, that's, again, the traditional view of teaching. Facts, sometimes we call this shallow learning. What date Columbus sailed to America? What date Indonesia achieved independence? What temperature water boils at, yes? Then there's procedural content. This is the cognitive thinking skills. So a teacher, says Ball, should anticipate, should guess, should predict which thinking skills are going to be needed. In this case, the maths teacher will know that paraphrasing, exemplification, giving examples, and simplification will be needed in his lesson. Okay? In part 2, we're going to look about how to teach the grammar of a particular thinking skill. And here's the problem we're going to look at. So I'll see you in part 2.